Ethan Wells stumbled across the rocky ground of the barren moon. His ship had crashed 3 days ago and he was running out of food and water. The sky above was strange, with 2 suns that made the shadows sharp and the rocks glow faintly. Every step was heavy and his stomach growled painfully. He carried the last small pack of rations in his hand, knowing it might not be enough for himself to survive another day. As he climbed a jagged hill, a faint sound reached his ears. It was soft, almost like someone crying. He froze and looked around. Nothing moved at first, only the wind that swept over the moon's gray surface. Then he saw it, a small figure huddled behind a broken rock. It was a girl, not human. Her skin was pale blue and her eyes were large, shining with tears. She looked frightened and thin, barely able to stand. Ethan's heart ached. He approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently. The girl flinched but did not run. She spoke in a strange, broken language, only a few words he could not understand. Her lips trembled and her body shook from hunger or fear. Ethan realized that she was alone, lost, and starving. He looked at the food in his hand. There was only enough for himself to survive another day, maybe 2. His first thought was that he could not risk giving it away. But then he saw her eyes, wide, wet, desperate, and his stomach tightened. Without thinking much, he knelt and broke the small ration in half. He held it out to her. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She stared at the food, then at Ethan, then back at the food. Slowly, she reached out her small hands and took it. Her hands were tiny and cold, and she held the food as if it were gold. She ate quickly, shivering, tears rolling down her cheeks. Ethan watched quietly, a small smile on his face. For a moment, it felt like the world was just the 2 of them and nothing else mattered. After she finished, she looked at him and spoke softly, her voice trembling. Ethan could not understand the words, but she placed a small glowing stone in his hand. He looked down. The stone was warm, pulsing gently with light. She whispered her name, Lyra. Then she looked away, embarrassed or shy. Ethan nodded, holding the stone carefully. "I'll remember you, Lyra," he said. She only looked at him with wide eyes and a faint nod. He wanted to ask where her family was, why she was alone, but she only shook her head slightly and ran off toward a distant canyon. The next day, Ethan's rescue team found him. He was weak, dirty, and hungry but alive. They lifted him onto their ship, asking what had happened. Ethan tried to explain, but no one understood. A human had fed an alien girl on a moon far away and no one would believe it. But he kept the glowing stone hidden in his pocket, the only proof that it was real. Months passed. Ethan returned to Earth and tried to live a normal life. He worked as an engineer, fixing machines, designing ships, and helping others. But every night he looked at the stone. The memory of Lyra's eyes and the way she had eaten the food stayed with him. He often wondered what had happened to her. Was she safe? Was she alone? Meanwhile, far across the stars, Lyra survived. She hid, scavenged, and learned quickly. The memory of the human who gave her food stayed in her mind. She repeated his name silently when she was scared. That small act of kindness, a simple meal, had changed something inside her. It gave her hope and a belief that not all beings were cruel or selfish. She began to grow stronger, determined to survive. Ethan could not have known that the girl he fed would one day become powerful beyond imagination. That a simple choice to share his last meal would echo across the galaxy. But in that moment, kneeling in the cold wind and watching her eat, he felt something warm inside him. The world might be harsh, the stars far and lonely, but a small act of kindness could make a difference. The sun began to set on the strange moon, casting long shadows across the rocks. Ethan packed the rest of his supplies, preparing to be rescued. He looked one last time toward the canyon where Lyra had disappeared. He whispered quietly, "Be safe, little one." And somewhere in the distance, he felt a faint warmth, like the stone in his pocket was alive with light. He did not know it yet, but a story had begun. A story that would span 10 years, a story of hope, courage, and the strength of a human heart. A story that would one day bring an empire to its knees, all because a human had shared his last meal with a crying alien girl. Years passed and Ethan Wells tried to live a quiet life on Earth. After his rescue from the barren moon, he returned to the cities, to the hum of machines and crowded streets. He worked as an engineer, designing engines and repairing spacecraft, a life ordinary but honest. Most days he felt like the universe had forgotten him and perhaps he had forgotten it too. Yet every night, he would sit quietly in his small apartment, holding the glowing stone Lyra had given him. The stone never stopped pulsing with a soft light, a reminder of the day he had shared his last meal. He would run his fingers over it, remembering her small hands, her tearful eyes, and the way she had eaten like she had never eaten before. He thought about her often, wondering what had become of the lonely girl he had saved. Was she safe? Was she alive? The questions had no answers, yet he held on to the memory as tightly as he did the stone. Ethan's friends never understood why he kept the strange object. "It's just a rock," they would say, laughing. But he knew it was more than that. It was proof that the universe could be strange, mysterious, and full of unexpected connections. That one small act, a meal shared with a child from another world, had created a bond across the stars. Yet the world around him moved on, unaware of what had truly happened. Meanwhile, far from Earth, Lyra had grown up. Alone and hiding, she learned to survive in a galaxy that could be cruel and unforgiving. She remembered the human who had given her hope. His kindness had been a spark in her dark world, and it had stayed with her every day. She scavenged for food, learned to move silently, and began to understand the complex systems of the alien world she had been born into. Lyra was not an ordinary girl. She was the daughter of powerful rulers, thought to have been lost in a raid that destroyed her home. But the human small act had given her a reason to live. She trained herself, learning languages, customs, and strategy. Every lesson she took, every skill she mastered, was inspired by the hope she had felt when a human had shared his last meal with her. She grew strong not just in body but in mind. Back on Earth, Ethan's life remained steady but quiet. He would often look up at the stars, imagining distant worlds and wondering if any of them remembered him. Sometimes he felt a strange sense of longing, as if something important had been left unfinished. The glowing stone on his desk seemed to pulse more brightly during these moments, as if reminding him that the story was not over. Ethan's colleagues noticed a change in him. He was more thoughtful, quieter, but there was a calm confidence in his manner. He did not know why he felt different, but perhaps it was because he carried a secret in his heart, that he had once touched a life in a way that would echo far beyond the limits of Earth. Across the galaxy, Lyra began to rise. She gathered allies quietly, learning to command respect without showing cruelty. She never forgot the human who had saved her, and she carried his image with her in times of doubt. Her empire, once broken and in chaos, slowly began to rebuild under her leadership. She studied the ways of humans from stories she had found in old transmissions and records, fascinated by their compassion and resilience. The lessons Ethan had unknowingly given her were becoming the foundation of her rule. Ethan remained unaware of the changes happening far across the stars. He worked, slept, and sometimes stared at the stone, thinking of the girl who had eaten his last meal. He had no idea that his small act of kindness had shaped the destiny of a future empress. In a galaxy full of war and ambition, his choice had been simple: to give even when he had nothing left. And that choice had planted a seed that would grow into something powerful and vast. Sometimes Ethan would smile faintly, remembering Lyra's glowing eyes and shy nod when he gave her the food. He felt a strange warmth, a connection that went beyond explanation. The universe seemed larger, full of possibilities, and he began to believe that small acts could indeed matter, even across light years. Years went by, and Ethan's life remained ordinary to everyone else, but he felt extraordinary in ways that others could not see. A quiet pride filled him, not for fame or reward, but for the knowledge that he had done something right, something good, something that would not be forgotten. And somewhere far away, Lyra remembered him too. The human who had saved her. The human who had believed in her when no one else did. That memory became her guiding light, shaping her decisions and her path. The kindness of a human had changed the fate of a lost girl, and in turn she would change the fate of worlds. Ethan did not know it yet, but the universe had begun to move toward him. The bond he had created, quiet and unnoticed, was growing stronger with every passing year. A story had begun that would reach across the stars, a story of hope, loyalty, and the power of a single act of compassion. And one day that story would return to him in ways he could never imagine. The skies above Earth had never looked so strange. Ships, enormous and unlike anything humans had ever seen, appeared in the distance. They shimmered with colors that no telescope could identify, reflecting sunlight in waves of blue, silver, and gold. Across the planet, people ran to shelters, governments scrambled jets, and alarms rang in every city. Fear gripped the world. Ethan Wells was at home, staring out of his apartment window. He had been thinking about the stars again, wondering about Lyra as he often did. But now the lights in the sky were too bright to ignore. A part of him felt an odd calm even as the world panicked. The glowing stone on his desk pulsed in response, its light growing stronger, warmer. It It was almost as if it recognized something coming. The ships landed carefully in open plains and coastal areas. From them, strange beings began to emerge. They were tall, with shimmering armor and eyes that glowed faintly in the sunlight. At first, humans expected an attack, but the aliens did not raise weapons. Instead, they moved slowly and deliberately, showing no sign of aggression. Ethan's heart raced when a smaller shuttle descended near his apartment building. It landed gently, its doors sliding open with a soft hiss. Out stepped the girl he had once saved. She was no longer a small, crying child. She was tall and regal, her blue skin glowing slightly under the Earth's sun. She wore an elegant uniform that shimmered with gold and silver, and her eyes, once wide with fear, now held power, confidence, and recognition. Lyra walked slowly toward Ethan, her steps measured, her gaze fixed on him. The soldiers behind her lowered their heads and knelt. They knelt not out of fear but respect. Ethan could hardly believe his eyes. He rubbed them, thinking it was a dream. Lyra stopped in front of him. "Ethan Wells," she said softly, her voice strong and melodic. "Do you remember me?" Ethan swallowed hard. His voice caught in his throat. "Lyra, is it really you?" She nodded. A faint smile crossed her lips. "I am what you made me. Do you remember the last meal you gave me on that moon?" Ethan nodded, unable to speak. "I have never forgotten it. And I have never forgotten you." The world around them seemed to pause. Helicopters hovered, people watched from below, and satellites captured the moment. Lyra's presence was calm, commanding, and full of purpose. She had returned, not as the helpless girl he had met, but as the empress of a vast empire. Ethan's mind raced. How could this be possible? She had been alone, lost, hiding for years. And now she commanded ships that could destroy cities, fleets that could cross galaxies in days. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw not threat, but gratitude, warmth, and a sense of honor. Lyra extended her hand. "You saved my life when I had nothing. I am here to return that debt and more. I have come to bring peace, not war, to your world." Ethan hesitated, then took her hand. The soldiers behind her rose but remained respectful, forming a protective formation around them. News broadcasts captured every moment. Humanity watched in awe as a single human was recognized by an alien empire as a hero and a benefactor. No one had imagined such an event in their lifetime. The girl who had been crying on a lonely moon had returned with power, and she bowed before a human. Ethan's life had been ordinary, quiet, and unremarkable. He had never sought fame or glory. Yet here he was, at the center of a moment that would be remembered for generations. The glowing stone on his desk had pulsed all these years, a silent signal that destiny was moving toward him, and now it had arrived. Lyra spoke again, her voice firm. "My empire will kneel to honor your kindness, Ethan. You showed me what humanity could be, and that lesson guided me through every hardship I faced. Today I honor you as my savior, as my teacher in compassion." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. I just shared my last meal. I didn't know it would." "You changed my life," she interrupted gently. "And in doing so, you changed the path of a galaxy." The soldiers behind her saluted, kneeling once more in unison. Across the plains, reporters captured images, satellites beamed the event around the world, and people stared in wonder. The human who had given food to a stranger, a child, had inspired an empire. Ethan looked at Lyra and smiled, tears forming in his eyes. "I never imagined anything like this." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "The universe has a way of returning kindness, Ethan. Your simple act, your belief in hope, brought me to this moment. And now, together we can build a better future, for humans and for my people." For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of ordinary life lift. He had lived quietly, thinking his actions were small, insignificant. Yet here, before the world, the galaxy, and a powerful empire, he realized that even small acts could echo across time and space. And as he stood beside Lyra, the human who had once shared his last meal, he understood that the universe was full of surprises, full of hope, and full of stories waiting to be written. Stories that began with a simple act of kindness. Ethan stepped onto Lyra's flagship with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The interior was vast, brighter than any building on Earth, with smooth walls that seemed to glow from within. Alien symbols pulsed along the corridors, and the air was filled with a faint hum of energy. Soldiers in polished armor moved efficiently, bowing as he passed. It was clear that this was not just a ship, it was a mobile palace, a symbol of power and order. Lyra walked beside him, her presence commanding yet gentle. She had grown into a strong leader, but in her eyes, Ethan saw the same gratefulness he had witnessed when she was a child. I wanted to show you, she said, what your kindness has created. Ethan shook his head. I don't understand. I just gave you food when you needed it. That's all. Lyra smiled softly. It was more than food. It was hope. You reminded me that even in the darkest times, there are beings willing to help. That idea has guided me for years. As they walked through the ship, Lyra explained her journey. After that day on the barren moon, she had survived by hiding and learning quickly. She had discovered remnants of her people, fought to reclaim her rightful place, and built an empire in the process. Every decision she had made, every alliance she had formed, was influenced by the memory of a human who had believed in her when no one else did. You taught me compassion, she said. Not through words but through action. Even when you had nothing, you gave. That changed how I view the universe. That changed how I rule my people. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, a mixture of pride and humility. I never thought it would go that far, he said. I was just trying to help someone in need. Lyra turned to him, her expression serious but kind. Sometimes the smallest acts have the largest consequences. You are living proof of that. They entered the command chamber, a vast space filled with holographic displays showing star systems, fleets, and planets. Lyra's advisors and generals waited silently, their eyes on her. She gestured toward Ethan. This is the human who saved my life. He is the reason my empire stands today. He is the reason I understand what compassion can do, and I want him to know that his actions will guide my people for generations. The generals exchanged glances. Some of them had wanted conquest, thinking humans were weak and unworthy of respect. But when Lyra spoke of Ethan, their expressions changed. They could see the truth in her words. Strength was not only in power or weapons but in wisdom, mercy, and the courage to do what is right, even in difficult situations. Ethan looked at the alien leaders, feeling out of place but also honored. He had lived quietly, believing he had done nothing remarkable. Yet here he was, standing in the center of an empire, a single human being recognized not for fighting but for kindness. Lyra continued, explaining how she had studied humans. She had collected stories, records, and transmissions from Earth, learning about human history, culture, and values. She admired the resilience, creativity, and compassion of humans. Your species has flaws but also great potential, she said. And you, Ethan, reminded me of that potential. You reminded me that even one life, one choice can change everything. The soldiers and generals knelt in unison, not because they feared him but because they respected him. Ethan's mind struggled to comprehend the scene. A human, a single human, had influenced the actions of billions across a galaxy. His simple act of sharing a meal had created ripples that now stretched across worlds. Lyra guided him to a central viewing platform overlooking a vast fleet. Ships of every size and shape were aligned with precision. These are the forces of my empire, she said. They follow me because I lead them wisely. But they respect you because you taught me the most important lesson of all, that true strength comes from compassion. Ethan finally understood. He had never sought fame, power, or recognition. He had simply done what he thought was right. And yet, that choice had shaped an empire. The galaxy itself had been touched by his actions. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. Ethan, the universe is full of challenges, but it is also full of opportunities to do good. You gave me hope when there was none. And now, together, we can create a future where humanity and my people work in peace, learning from one another. Ethan looked at the stars through the transparent hull of the flagship. He could see Earth in the distance, shining like a small blue jewel. He thought of the barren moon, of the day he had knelt and given away his last meal. That small act, so simple at the time, had grown into something far beyond his imagination. The human who had once felt powerless now stood at the center of a story that spanned galaxies. And he realized something important. Being human meant more than survival, more than technology or strength. It meant the ability to choose kindness even when it seemed impossible. That choice could change worlds. Lyra looked at him again, her eyes filled with trust and respect. The galaxy is vast, Ethan, but it remembers those who act with honor. You are one of them. Ethan nodded slowly, a quiet smile forming on his lips. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his small life and his choices, and he understood that even one person could make a difference that the universe would never forget. The human who had shared his last meal had changed an empire. The day had come. Ethan Wells stood on a wide platform in the heart of Lyra's capital, looking out over a crowd so vast it seemed endless. The alien city stretched into the sky, towers of crystal and metal glimmering under two suns. Ships hovered silently above, forming intricate patterns in the bright sky. It was a sight unlike anything on Earth. The entire empire had gathered, not for war but to honor a single human. Lyra stood beside him, regal and proud, dressed in ceremonial robes that shone like starlight. Her presence commanded attention, and yet her eyes were warm, filled with gratitude. Soldiers, officials, and citizens alike knelt in unison, heads bowed in respect. Ethan could hardly believe it. He had never sought fame or glory, yet here was an entire empire kneeling to honor the simple act of kindness he had shown 10 years ago. Lyra raised her hand and silence fell. Even the distant hum of hovering ships seemed to pause. "People of my empire," she began, her voice clear and strong, "today we honor someone who changed history, not through power, not through conquest, but through a single act of compassion. 10 years ago this human, Ethan Wells, shared his last meal with me when I had nothing. That choice gave me hope, and hope has guided me to this day." Ethan felt his face flush. He looked at Lyra and shook his head. "It was nothing," he said quietly. "I only did what anyone would do." Lyra smiled, but her eyes were serious. "It was everything. You reminded me that even the smallest act of kindness can have the greatest impact. You showed me what it means to be human, and that lesson has shaped every decision I have made as your ally and as an empress." The crowd remained kneeling, their silence filled with respect. Children stared with wide eyes, elders bowed, and generals saluted. Across the empire, transmissions were sent to distant worlds. Humans on Earth watched in awe as news arrived. The human who had given hope to a lost girl had inspired an empire. Lyra stepped forward and spoke again. "Ethan Wells, because of you, my empire will never forget the value of kindness, courage, and honor. Today we kneel to show our respect for your actions and for the humanity you represent." Ethan's heart raced. He had never imagined such a moment. A lifetime of quiet days, of working, surviving, and trying to do what was right had led to this. He realized that even the smallest choices could ripple across the stars, shaping destinies he could never have imagined. Lyra placed her hand on his shoulder. "The galaxy is full of challenges but also full of hope. And hope begins with acts like yours." Behind her, the citizens of the empire raised glowing banners, symbols of Lyra's people waving in the sunlight. Ships above formed patterns that spelled words of gratitude in light. The entire scene was breathtaking, a celebration of life, honor, and the power of simple human choices. Ethan looked around and saw the impact of his small act of compassion. Soldiers who had been trained for battle now stood quietly, not as warriors but as witnesses. Leaders who had commanded fleets were humbled, acknowledging that strength alone was not enough. The empire had learned that mercy, kindness, and courage could change history as much as power. Children in the crowd stared up at Ethan in awe. Some whispered, "He is human," as if it alone made him remarkable. But Ethan knew it was not being human that mattered, it was choosing to act with humanity, even when it was difficult, even when survival seemed impossible. That choice had changed one life, and that life had grown to touch billions. Lyra turned to Ethan, her expression proud. "You taught me that compassion is stronger than fear, and that courage is measured not by the battles you fight, but by the choices you make when no one is watching. Today the Empire kneels not because we are forced but because we are grateful. Grateful to you." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. He looked up at the sky, the twin suns casting light across the city, across the Empire, and even across the distance to Earth. His life had been ordinary but his choices had been remembered. A simple meal, shared in a moment of need, had grown into a legacy that would echo across generations. For a moment the world felt still. Ethan realized the truth. Kindness was powerful. Courage was powerful. Hope, when given freely, could shape destinies, build empires, and inspire millions. The story that began on a barren moon with a small, crying alien girl had reached its peak, and it was breathtaking. Lyra knelt slightly before him, bowing her head in respect. "Rise, Ethan Wells," she said softly. "Rise, for you have taught the galaxy the greatest lesson of all." Ethan stood tall, feeling the warmth of recognition, the weight of honor, and the truth of what he had done. Around him the empire rose not in obedience but in reverence. The citizens, the soldiers, and even the skies themselves seemed to celebrate the human who had shared his last meal. And in that moment Ethan understood something profound. Even one person acting with kindness could change the course of the universe. He had been ordinary but his actions had been extraordinary. The galaxy had remembered him and it would never forget. As the twin suns shone on the kneeling empire, Ethan Wells smiled, finally understanding that hope, compassion, and humanity were stronger than any weapon, more lasting than any empire, and capable of shaping destinies across the stars. The human who had shared his last meal had not just saved a life, he had inspired a galaxy.